They thought Kayaköy was just another forgotten village, an archaeological site frozen in time. But when Dr. Helena Stavros and her American team broke open the church floor, they didn't just disturb history. They awakened something that had been waiting for centuries. The reliquary they uncovered was no artifact. It was a prison, black and silver, carved with warnings, sealed with bones and a cross. The villagers had abandoned Kayaköy in 1923, but their voices still lingered in the ruins. And when that seal cracked, the dead answered with fury. Within minutes, shadows moved on their own. Ancient stone faces turned to watch them, and the air itself began to collapse. The ground opened under their feet, equipment rebelled against its owners, and blood spilled across centuries-old stones. The screams weren't just echoes of the past. They were hungry, alive, demanding a price. This wasn't folklore. This wasn't myth. It was punishment. And just when the team thought the nightmare couldn't get worse, an old man appeared out of the darkness. He claimed to be a professor. But what he truly was, none of them could have imagined. This is the true story of the Kayaköy excavation, how arrogance turned discovery into horror, and how a guardian appeared when death itself rose from the ruins. What happened in the abandoned village of Kayaköy should have stayed buried. But Dr. Helena Stavros and her team didn't believe in respecting the warnings of the dead. They should have. The American archaeological team set up equipment in what had once been a thriving Greek community. Kayaköy, abandoned since 1923, stood frozen in time, hundreds of empty houses climbing hillsides like ghostly sentinels. Dr. Helena Stavros, 43, surveyed the site with cold efficiency. She had built her career on aggressive excavation methods and complete disregard for local superstitions. Tyler Brooks, the Stanford graduate student, unpacked survey equipment. Vanessa Clark, fresh from NYU, framed shots for her Instagram followers. Dr. Rebecca Walsh from MIT calibrated her expensive LIDAR equipment. Dr. Mehmet Yilmaz, the Turkish liaison from Ankara University, watched with growing unease. He knew the warnings about Kayaköy weren't mere superstition. Professor Stavros, Dr. Yilmaz said carefully, the villagers say this church is very dangerous. They believe spirits here were bound by ancient rites. Helena turned with disdain. We're here for scientific research, not peasant folklore. But the truly shocking part was still hours away from revealing itself. The first 4 hours proceeded normally. Tyler mapped grid squares, Vanessa photographed for social media, Rebecca's equipment built 3D models. Dr. Yilmaz translated inscriptions. His contributions met with impatience. Tyler's trowel struck something metallic beneath the altar stones. The sound was wrong, not steel against rock, but a resonant chime that lingered far too long. Professor Stavros, Tyler called, brushing away dirt from an ornate container. This looks like a Byzantine reliquary in remarkable condition. Helena hurried over. The object was beautiful and unsettling. Black and silver covered in intricate patterns that seemed to writhe when viewed from different angles. Ancient Greek letters were carved deep into the lid. Dr. Yilmaz went pale examining the inscription. Dr. Stavros, please stop. This writing isn't decorative. It's a warning. It says this should never be opened. It speaks of death's curse, vengeful spirits imprisoned within these walls. Helena's expression hardened. I respect your folklore knowledge, but we're dealing with medieval religious art, not supernatural forces. She reached for the reliquary without hesitation. Please, Dr. Yilmaz desperately grabbed her wrist. At least document the warnings first. Don't touch me, Helena snapped, jerking away. Don't lecture me about protocols. The ancient lock gave way easily. As the lid opened, a sound like wind through vast caverns whispered through the ruins. The air grew thick and oppressive. Inside, wrapped in crumbling cloth, lay bone fragments and a tarnished silver cross. The bones were strangely warm. "Probably just some local saint's remains," Rebecca said dismissively. This was the moment when everything changed in the most terrifying way possible. Tyler felt it first, creeping coldness seeping from the ground. Temperature around the altar dropped 15 degrees in seconds. Shadows cast by walls began moving independently, shifting as if possessing malevolent consciousness. "Did anyone else hear that?" Vanessa asked nervously. A low rhythmic sound was building from beneath their feet, like vast choir chanting in inhuman harmonies. Dr. Yilmaz stepped back, face ashen. "We need to close it right now before whatever was bound inside awakens." Too late. The scream from the open reliquary wasn't human, animal, or anything natural. It was pure rage that had been fermenting for centuries, collective fury of supernatural entities, waiting in darkness. Helena stumbled backward as waves of supernatural malevolence washed over her. The reliquary crashed against altar stones, but instead of closing, the lid flew wider as the trapped entity fought to escape. Black smoke poured out, flowing across flagstones like a living thing seeking prey. This wasn't normal smoke, but pure malevolence that had been compressed so long its release created visible air distortions. "What the hell is that?" Rebecca screamed as her equipment malfunctioned catastrophically. Sparks flew from her LiDAR array, her tablet flickered through impossible colors before dying. The smoke moved with terrifying purpose. Where it touched carved stone faces on church walls, impossible things happened. Ancient sculptures began changing expression, blank stone eyes suddenly tracking the terrified archaeologists. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. This is when the real horror began. Tyler broke first, running toward their vehicles. He made it 15 feet before ground beneath him ceased to exist. Stone solid for centuries crumbled like paper, opening into a chasm extending into absolute darkness. He fell hard, legs striking rock with a sound like breaking wood. Tyler's scream echoed from depths, quickly swallowed by something worse, low, satisfied chuckling from the pit itself. "Tyler!" Vanessa screamed, rushing toward the edge, but her photography equipment grew burning hot, metal heating so rapidly it seared her palms. The camera exploded with violent force, plastic and metal fragments carving bloody channels across her face. Dr. Yilmaz backed toward vehicles when massive stones began falling from clear sky, enormous chunks of masonry. A carved marble block crashed inches from his head, shaking the entire ruins. Rebecca faced the most terrifying attack. Her LiDAR equipment turned against her with malevolent intelligence. The laser array began firing at full intensity at her flesh. Invisible beams burned through her jacket into shoulder muscle before she threw herself out of range. Helena stood frozen, watching her expedition disintegrate. Each team member suffered injuries that should have killed them. But somehow they were all still alive, understanding that malevolent intelligence orchestrated their suffering. Wait a second. Don't miss this detail. This systematic torment was only the beginning. "We have to get out," Tyler's voice called from the pit depths. "Something's wrong with this place." "The cars," Dr. Yilmaz shouted, dodging another stone block. They limped across ruins as black smoke followed like supernatural predators. Temperature plummeted, their breath forming white clouds despite warm afternoon. Chanting grew louder, resolving into liturgical singing in ancient Greek carrying anger and condemnation. At the parking area, they discovered their escape route had become another horror. Both SUVs sat where positioned, but something was catastrophically wrong. Metal chassis was corroded beyond recognition, as if decades of rust had formed in minutes. Tires had disintegrated entirely, leaving twisted rims. Tyler, dragging himself from the pit using roots, his leg clearly broken, tried the ignition. Nothing. Rebecca popped the hood, every component destroyed by what appeared to be concentrated acid. "This is impossible," Helena whispered. "Machines don't dissolve like this." "Tell that to whatever's in that cursed container," Vanessa said, pressing torn shirt against bleeding face cuts. Sun was setting, temperature dropping toward freezing. With serious wounds, hiking 10 kilometers through rough terrain would prove fatal. Their communication equipment was destroyed. "You won't believe this, but this is when night fell and everything became a nightmare." As darkness settled over Kayaköy, the site underwent transformation, defying physics. Stone houses, empty for over a century, began showing habitation signs. Lights flickered behind boarded windows. Shadows moved through doorways. Voices spoke in the dialect of Greeks forced to abandon this place during 1923's population exchange. "They're not happy we're here," Dr. Yilmaz said quietly. "The people who lived here died far from home, never returning. Something evil is using their pain." Helena looked genuinely frightened for the first time. "This isn't real." Mass hallucination from stress and injuries. But black smoke from the reliquary took on more definite, terrifying shapes. Twisted silhouettes emerged, forms moving like humans but wrong in every detail. Too tall, limbs bending impossibly, faces nothing but void and malice. Entities began circling their camp like predators, staying at the edge of weak lantern light. Air grew thick and difficult to breathe. Each team member felt overwhelming sensation of being watched, judged, and found wanting. What you've seen so far is nothing compared to what Helena still refused to admit. Despite obvious terror, painful injuries, Helena still refused to admit she'd been wrong about reality's nature. "We're not leaving this site," she declared, voice shaking but determined. "I've spent 3 years planning this excavation, raised hundreds of thousands in funding. I'm not being driven off by electromagnetic phenomenon." "Helena," Tyler pleaded, "people are seriously hurt. Something is very wrong here." "Before what? Before we're killed by ghosts? I'm a scientist. I deal in facts, not supernatural fairy tales." But shadow entities moved closer with hostile intent. They flowed across stones like liquid darkness, and wherever they passed, temperature dropped toward levels incompatible with human survival. Ice formed on surfaces, frost spreading in geometric patterns like writing in unknown script. But what happened next will haunt you forever. The attack was swift, coordinated, utterly terrifying in supernatural precision. Shadow things didn't need direct contact. They had more insidious methods. The very environment became actively hostile. Stone steps crumbled when someone tried using them. Walls that had withstood earthquakes chose that moment to collapse. Rebecca screamed as invisible claws raked across her back, leaving deep gouges. Wounds were real, bleeding freely, but nothing visible could have caused them. Tyler found himself pushed backward by unseen forces. Vanessa's last lantern exploded without warning, plunging them into deeper darkness. But worst fate was reserved for Dr. Yilmaz. Ground beneath his feet opened like a living mouth. Deliberate, purposeful opening lined with stone teeth. He fell into absolute darkness, his voice calling for help from impossibly far below, though the opening sealed itself as suddenly as it appeared. "Mehmet!" Helena shouted, crawling to where the gap had been. But there was nothing but solid stone. Dr. Yilmaz had vanished completely. But just then, the doorbell rang in their hopeless situation. Just when their situation seemed hopeless, they heard an unexpected sound cutting through supernatural chaos. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" I saw lights and heard people shouting for help. The voice was elderly but strong, speaking English with clear American accent. Through otherworldly gloom, a figure emerged, a man in his 70s, wearing hiking clothes and carrying a backpack. He moved with confident stride, eyes holding calm intelligence that cut through their panic. There was something supernaturally calming about his presence. "My goodness, what has happened here?" the Guardian asked, taking in their injuries. "I'm Professor Hayes, William Hayes, from Columbia University. I was hiking Shepherd's Paths when I heard people calling for help." Helena stared in disbelief. "Professor Hayes? And what are you doing here?" "I'm researching Byzantine church architecture," the Guardian explained calmly, setting down his backpack and assessing their injuries with obvious medical knowledge. "I have proper permits, but that's not important. You people are hurt and need assistance." The presence of another rational human being was like a lifeline. The shadow shapes retreated the moment the Guardian arrived, melting back into darkness, as if his presence repelled their malevolent nature. "Our vehicles are destroyed," Tyler explained. "And our colleague, Dr. Yilmaz, the ground swallowed him whole." The Guardian surveyed the scene: corroded vehicles, destroyed equipment, the open reliquary still pouring black smoke. His gaze lingered with intensity of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. "Ah," the Guardian said quietly. "You opened the reliquary? Wait a second. Don't miss this detail about how much this apparent stranger knew." "You know what that is?" Rebecca demanded. "You know what's causing all this supernatural nonsense?" "I know what it represents," the Guardian replied carefully, approaching the altar with caution, but no fear. The Byzantine Church used reliquaries not just to house sacred objects, but to contain things they considered too dangerous to destroy. This site has a very troubled history. The Guardian studied Greek inscriptions without touching the cursed artifact. The warnings are quite explicit. This reliquary was designed to bind something church fathers considered actively evil, too powerful to destroy but too dangerous to allow freedom. "You believe in this supernatural nonsense?" Helena scoffed, though her voice lacked earlier conviction. The Guardian looked at her with eyes that seemed far older than his apparent age. "Dr. Stavros, isn't it? Helena Stavros from UC Berkeley? I've read your papers on aggressive excavation techniques. Very thorough work, very decisive in its approach to archaeological obstacles." The way the Guardian said those words made Helena's blood run cold. There was intimate familiarity with her work and something that might have been profound disappointment. "I don't know you," she said defensively. "How do you know so much about my work?" "But I know you," the Guardian replied with calm certainty. "I know all of you, actually. Tyler Brooks, the promising graduate student who deserves better supervision. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, whose innovations could revolutionize our field if she learned to respect what came before. Vanessa Clark, more interested in social media than preserving historical record. And Dr. Mehmet Yilmaz, the only member of your team who truly understood the significance of what you were dealing with." But the truly shocking part was that the moment the Guardian spoke Dr. Yilmaz's name, they heard a familiar voice from somewhere nearby. "Help! I'm trapped down here, but I think I can see a way out." "He's in the old crypt system predating the current church," the Guardian explained. "When you opened the reliquary, you awakened all the guardians of this place, spirits that have been sleeping for decades." "Guardians?" Vanessa asked. "Spirits bound by ancient oaths to protect this site from desecration. They've been dormant, but your actions roused them. They're not pleased with how you've treated their sacred sanctuary." As if summoned, shadow shapes emerged again, but this time more purposeful, organized, hostile. Temperature plummeted, their breath visible in white clouds. Ice formed on surfaces, stones cracking like rifle shots. Voices grew louder, chanting, prayers, conversations in ancient Greek rising like supernatural chorus of condemnation. "They're coming," the Guardian said with unnatural calm. "And this time, they're not interested in warnings or minor injuries. You've pushed them beyond tolerance, and they're committed to making you pay full price for your arrogance." This was the moment when everything changed fundamentally. The shadows took definite, terrifying shapes, the angry dead of an entire community. People forced from homes during population exchange who died in exile, now finding their resting place violated by disrespectful strangers. Men, women, children materialized, but twisted by death and supernatural rage. Hollow eye sockets leaked darkness, mouths opened too wide, revealing bottomless depths, hands elongated into claws capable of rending flesh and stone. They surrounded the team and began closing in with deliberate slowness, savoring fear and despair. With each step, ground turned to ice, temperature dropping toward incompatible levels. Emergency lanterns flickered and dimmed as if entity presence drained all energy. "Professor," Tyler gasped through chattering teeth, what do we do?" But something extraordinary happened to the Guardian. He no longer seemed simply a helpful stranger. His presence began filling space around them, growing larger and more substantial. When he spoke, his voice carried authority that made approaching spirits pause. "You have trespassed on sacred ground," the Guardian said, addressing not the team but supernatural entities. "You have violated sanctity and shown contempt for warnings of those before you. But they are learning now. They understand their error, and in that understanding, there is still hope for redemption." The spirits responded with hissing like steam from massive boiler, expressing centuries of accumulated rage. Their leader, a figure in Byzantine priest robes, stepped forward and spoke in a voice like grinding stones. "They defiled our sanctuary," the spirit intoned with absolute condemnation. "They opened what was sealed by holy rites. They showed no respect for warnings of the dead." "Yes," the Guardian agreed calmly despite supernatural chaos. "All true, and their actions have been inexcusable. But look at them now. They understand their error. They are afraid, and in that fear is the beginning of wisdom." You won't believe this, but what happened next would change everything. Helena found herself face to face with the priest spirit. Its hollow eyes looked directly into her soul, examining every decision she'd made, every warning ignored in pursuit of academic success. "I'm sorry," she whispered, words torn from her throat. "I didn't understand what I was doing. I thought warnings were ignorant superstition. I was wrong. Terribly, catastrophically wrong." The spirit considered her words with patient attention. "Superstition. Is that what you call beliefs of those before you? Warnings written in blood and tears by those who understood the true cost?" "I was arrogant," Helena continued, voice growing stronger. "I thought having degrees and technology gave me the right to take whatever I wanted from historical sites, to ignore beliefs of people whose ancestors created these sacred places." Tyler found his voice. "We all were wrong. We came thinking we were superior to people who warned us. We treated Dr. Yilmaz like he was ignorant for respecting traditions." And now?" the spirit asked, terrible gaze including the entire team. "What do you understand now that you've seen consequences?" "Now we know there are forces beyond our ability to understand or control," Rebecca said, technological arrogance completely shattered. "There are things infinitely more important than data collection. We came to extract knowledge for our own benefit without considering what we owed to people and spirits who called this place sacred." Vanessa nodded emphatically, blood still trickling from face wounds. We treated this village like backdrop for social media content, like tragedy here was just interesting historical context. We never thought about real people who lived here, forced to leave everything behind, who died in exile, dreaming of homeland they'd never see again. The Guardian watched this exchange with approval, and supernatural entities seemed to listen with more than interest. Temperature stopped dropping. Ice on stones began showing first signs of melting. Redemption is possible, the entity intoned with authority of centuries and weight of divine judgment. But it cannot be achieved without genuine sacrifice and meaningful restitution. You must make amends, not with money or academic recognition, but with true understanding and lasting commitment. You must tell others what you learned here. You must ensure sites like this are treated with respect they deserve. Yes, Helena said without hesitation. Academic career suddenly seeming less important than making things right. Whatever it takes, we'll do whatever you ask. The reliquary must be sealed again, the spirit continued, but not by your hands. Your actions have caused too much harm. It must be closed by one who truly understands the nature of what lies within and proper methods for containing such forces. The Guardian stepped forward without hesitation, movements confident and purposeful. I will take responsibility for sealing it properly. The spirits parted to allow the Guardian passage to the altar, where the cursed reliquary still lay open, pouring dark contents into night air. As the Guardian approached the ancient container, something remarkable happened to his appearance. Hiking clothes remained the same, but there was something fundamentally different about how he moved, how shadows fell around him, how air seemed to respond to his presence. The Guardian seemed both more and less than human, ancient in a way that had nothing to do with physical age. The Guardian began speaking words in a language none recognized, syllables that seemed to predate human speech and touch fundamental forces governing reality's structure. As his voice rose and fell in complex sound patterns, the reliquary began responding to his commands. Black smoke that had been poisoning air started flowing backward, returning to its prison like film running in reverse. As last wisps of darkness were drawn back into the container, the silver lid began closing of its own accord. It settled into place with a sound like relief sigh, and ancient lock mechanism clicked shut with finality that seemed to echo through dimensions beyond the physical world. As supernatural darkness was finally contained again, the priest spirit nodded once in acknowledgement to the Guardian, then turned back to address the archaeological team for final time. Go now, it said simply, voice already beginning to fade as supernatural forces maintaining its manifestation started to dissipate. Leave this place in peace and remember what you learned here. The dead deserve far better than to be treated as objects for your curiosity. Honor their memory by ensuring others understand lessons you learned through such painful experience. The spirits began fading gradually, melting back into shadows from which they'd emerged. But before vanishing entirely, they fulfilled their final obligation. Dr. Mehmet Yilmaz was returned to the surface, lifted up through solid stone as easily as if it were water, deposited gently on ground near altar, where colleagues could see he was shaken, but essentially unharmed. I'm all right, he called out, though deeply affected by whatever he'd experienced during his time in underground chambers. I saw things down there, visions of this place's history, lives of people who lived here, and what they endured when forced to leave. The Guardian carefully lifted the sealed reliquary from altar, handling it with reverence due to container of such dangerous supernatural contents. This will be returned to proper religious authorities, the Guardian said with quiet certainty. The Byzantine Orthodox Church maintains protocols for handling artifacts like this. It will be stored in consecrated location where it can never again be disturbed. What happened next as dawn broke will leave you speechless. As first rays of dawn began breaking over mountains surrounding Kayaköy, both SUVs sat exactly where they'd been parked the previous morning. Tires were completely intact, metal showed no signs of corrosion, and when Tyler tried the ignition with trembling fingers, both engines started immediately with normal, smooth efficiency. But they were completely destroyed, Rebecca protested, staring in disbelief at her LiDAR equipment, now functioning perfectly and showing no signs of catastrophic damage. Everything was corroded beyond repair. Sometimes, the Guardian said with slight, enigmatic smile that seemed to hold depths of meaning they could never fully comprehend, the most important lessons in life require dramatic demonstration to make their point effectively. But once those lessons have been truly learned and internalized, there's no need for consequences to be permanent. The goal was education, not punishment. They loaded equipment in complete silence, each member lost in profound contemplation of what they'd experienced and how fundamentally it had changed their understanding of reality, history, and their own responsibilities. Dr. Yilmaz approached the Guardian as they prepared to leave, expression combining gratitude, respect, and deep curiosity about the true nature of their mysterious rescuer. "Thank you," he said with simple sincerity. "Thank you for showing them what I could not." "You were doing your job perfectly," the Guardian replied with warm approval. "You provided warnings, offered historical context, tried to help them understand the significance of what they were dealing with." Helena realized that in all the chaos and supernatural terror of the previous night, she had never properly introduced herself to the man who had saved all their lives. "Professor Hayes," she said, approaching the Guardian with humility that would have been completely foreign to her personality just 24 hours earlier, "I wanted to thank you personally. When we get back to the States, I would very much like to discuss your research. Perhaps there might be some way we could collaborate." "That's very kind of you to offer," the Guardian replied, but there was something in his voice that suggested complications she couldn't yet understand. "I'm afraid, however, that such a collaboration won't be possible." "Oh?" Helena asked, puzzled by his response. "Will you be remaining in Turkey for an extended research period?" The Guardian smiled again, that same enigmatic expression they had noticed during the darkest moments of their ordeal, an expression that seemed to contain mysteries they would never be able to solve. "Something like that, Dr. Stavros. Something very much like that." They drove away from the ruins of Kayaköy as the sun climbed higher into the morning sky, each of them fundamentally changed in ways they were still trying to understand. The abandoned village faded into the distance behind them, but none of them would ever forget what they had experienced there. It wasn't until they reached Istanbul University 3 days later that Helena decided to reach out to Professor Hayes. She wanted to discuss the night's events with someone who had clearly understood the forces they had encountered. But when she called Columbia University's Byzantine Studies Department, the response left her speechless. "I'm sorry," the department secretary said, "but we don't have anyone by that name on our faculty. Are you sure you have the right university?" Helena tried the main directory, the emeritus faculty list, even the visiting scholar program. No William Hayes, no one matching his description, no record that such a person had ever been associated with Columbia University in any capacity. Tyler, who had been helping with the search, looked up from his laptop. "Professor Stavros, I've checked every Byzantine studies program in the country. There's no William Hayes anywhere. She expanded the search to include international universities, archaeological societies, even historical preservation groups. Nothing? Professor William Hayes, the man who had saved their lives and taught them the most important lesson of their careers, simply didn't exist. But we all saw him, Vanessa protested when they discussed it later. He was there. He spoke to us, helped us, sealed the reliquary. With it was a note. Some things are meant to be preserved not in museums, but in memory. Teach others to respect what they do not understand. W.H. Elena kept the cross on her desk as a reminder that there are forces in this world beyond human comprehension, and that the greatest wisdom often lies in acknowledging what we do not and cannot know. The abandoned village of Kayaköy still stands, its empty houses open to visitors who come to learn about its history. But the locals still warn people not to venture into the old Taxiaris church after dark. Some warnings are written in the bones of the earth itself, and some lessons can only be learned by those brave enough, or foolish enough, to ignore them, until they meet someone who helps them understand that the greatest discoveries come not from what we take, but from what we choose to leave undisturbed. After all, there are guardians watching over the sacred places of this world, and they're always closer than we think.